Thank you, everybody, again for joining in to this Med School Coach webinar brought to you in collaboration with Prospective Doctor. I'm Dr. Mehta, and I have with me also Dr. Marinelli and Dr. Katzen, who will introduce themselves in a second here. Today, we have a really interesting webinar, I think. You know, we do a lot of webinars over the course of the year. A lot of them are focused on specifics of the application, the personal statement, the interview, secondary applications. But today, we want to take a little bit broader approach. We're hoping that this approach sort of helps to an applicant develop your own style, your own brand, as we're calling it. So we're titling this webinar, Establishing Your Brand as a Pre-Med, how to separate yourself from the herd of other pre-meds who are out there. And so for the couple hundred people in attendance tonight, I'm really hoping that this will be able to give you guys a good, solid foundation on a little bit more of a, I would say, 1,000-foot view in terms of how to make yourself a great applicant, getting down to some of these specifics of things like the personal statement and the interview, but also leaving it a little think about what your application in general may mean. And I have with me, so I'm Dr. Mehta, and I have with me Dr. Marinelli and Dr. Katzen, who I'll just let introduce themselves and say a quick hi. So Dr. Katzen is a oncologist, is a renowned oncologist in the DC area. He's recently retired from clinical practice, but was a admissions committee member at George Washington for a number of years and serves as one of our master advisors. He's had an incredible success record in getting students into medical school. So Dr. Katzen, you just want to say a quick hi?
Hi, thank you, Dr. Mehta, and welcome to my chief advisor, Dr. Marinelli, as well. As Dr. Mehta said, I recently retired from the practice of oncology and had the opportunity to really spend the greater part of the last year helping coaching students like yourselves with all aspects of their application process, from simply editing essays to choosing schools. And we've got a lot of tips here for you tonight of how to make yourself stand out and how to maximize what it is you put into your application. So hopefully you'll have some questions for us and pick up some useful tips as we go along this evening.
Thanks, Dr. Katzen. And Dr. Marinelli is also with us. She's the Director of Advising at MedSchoolCoach, heads up our advising team, and was a admissions committee member at UC Irvine. Dr. Marinelli.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I will be participating as much as I can. I have a nasty cold, so I might be muted for a little bit and turn off my mic so I won't cough all throughout the presentation, but I'm really happy to be here tonight and share with you guys some tips that we've learned along the way, both going through the process ourselves, but then also helping a lot of applicants through this process as well.
Great, thank you. So again, everybody, make sure to use the question and answer feature on GoToWebinar and ask questions as you go. We'll try to get to them as many as possible at the end. We were going through the application statistics and talking a little bit about the number of applicants and the number of matriculants, basically being 60% of applicants don't get into med school any given year. So obviously a huge percent do not end up getting into medical school. So what is it that you can do to separate yourself? And sort of we're positioning this as brand awareness. So this is a concept that's taken from the business world, right? So how do you make yourself a brand? And if you actually look in business textbooks, there's a very actual science behind sort of thinking about how to make you, if you're a company, a brand. And what we've done is sort of try to spin that into a med school applicant, right? So what is it? What do business textbooks say about making a brand? So they say, the first thing you should do is conduct a thorough brand audit. And so that translates to me into take a look in the mirror, right? Find out who you are. Find out what it is that you have going for yourself. And let's think about that. What are my positives? What are my weaknesses? What is my selling point? And then business school will tell you, you should establish a value proposition. And that's sort of the what makes me special, right? What is it about me as a potential applicant that makes me a special applicant, right? How do I make myself somebody who's different? And then they'll tell you implement strategies to establish your brand identity, right? So you figured out, okay, here's what makes me special. Maybe it's that I really care for people. Maybe it's that I'm going to establish medicine and technology together somehow. So let me figure out a way to interlace my activities, my jobs, my research, my volunteer work, everything that I potentially do, my coursework, my major, everything that I do in college and beyond, to be somebody who is going to be able to establish that brand. And then every once in a while, you have to analyze and refine, which basically means take a step back, think about it. What is my hook? What am I doing to add to my story? Is the next activity I gain, is the next thing I do, is the next volunteer experience I have going to add to the story that I have of hopefully making myself a better applicant at the end of the day? And so these are sort of I think the questions and the things that you want to look at as you think about, hey, how am I going to establish my brand? If you could take these 4 questions and ask yourself those today or tomorrow, then I think you're going to end up thinking and figuring out, okay, yeah, I understand now what it's going to take for me to get into medical school. So let's do another quick poll, and hopefully this doesn't freeze everything and screw everything up, but let's try. And this one is, sort of, what's the most important part of the application process? All right. So a lot of you guys think the personal statement is the most important part. A lot of you guys think the interview is the most important part. You'll notice I left off GPA and MCAT because we all know that those are pretty important in the whole thing. And so what I wanted to gauge out there was, hey, what do you guys think is the most important part? And we're going to try to answer this question, I think, in a way that may surprise you, which is that while each of these individual components is extremely important in your actual application, what really is probably the most important thing to do is actually to distinguish yourself, right? To be somebody who's unique, to be able to tell your own story, whether it's through the interview, whether it's through the personal statement or the secondaries, tell a story that defines you as a unique individual, as somebody who is different than every other med school applicant out there, at least in some way, right? You have to sell yourself, right? So the most important thing is not one individual part of the application. It's sort of how you put it all together at the end of the day. And so that, I think, is what our take-home point is going to do, and so going to be. And so with that, I want to sort of turn it over to Dr. Marinelli to talk a little bit about some of the specifics within how to distinguish yourself, specifically the extracurricular activities, the personal statement, the interview, and she's going to go through a couple of examples and things that people have done to maybe solidify themselves as a unique brand as they're applying to medical school. So Dr. Marinelli, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So I think one thing, no matter where you're at on the application process, one thing you can really start thinking about to set yourself apart is what extracurricular activities are you going to do that's unique? Everybody's going to have some kind of shadowing experience, clinical experience, research experience, leadership experience, and you should have those, but could you possibly make these ones stand out a little bit and be a little bit different from what everybody else is going to have on their application? So I think some things that make an extracurricular activity unique is it being longitudinal, something that you've actually dedicated yourself to for a long time, where you have a substantial leadership role, maybe an original idea or an organization that you created with from yourself or with a friend, and also international aid. So a couple of examples that I saw that I've seen throughout the years that really stuck with me was I knew one applicant that made a nonprofit organization that they actually sold copper goods on Amazon, and then all of those goods went to underprivileged countries. And this was just an idea that him and his friends created themselves. he figured out how to do all the business aspects and actually distribute the goods that came from the country and then donate the money to that country. And it was just pretty innovative and also really dedicated to helping this country gather, some excuse me, sustainability with the donations from the selling of the goods, and then also really just showing how much he cared, just because he went out of his way to go ahead and do this organization. About a longitudinal activity and also kind of hitting that international mark, one of the applicants I worked with, he had been going to Mexico to an orphanage and to a clinic there for several years, I think since he was in high school. And when he applied, he had like 4 or 5 years of this under his belt, where he would go every single year and really make a difference to this orphanage and to this community in Mexico. And I just thought that was so great, because he could really tell a story about how this has developed and how this has impacted him in his path to becoming a physician. A couple other ones that sorry, go ahead, Dr. Mehta.
No, so I was just going to jump in and echo a little bit of what Dr. Marinelli was saying, and for you guys just to think about these extracurricular activities Dr. Marinelli just laid out, and a couple of the examples that she utilized are let's say international activities, and what is different about them versus most people's international activities, right? So we get a lot of applicants who've done things like global brigades or some 2-week span where they go abroad, and that's it. And they kind of expect that to carry them and say, well, I went abroad, I did international work. And yeah, that's true, and it looks good, and I'm all for it, and I think that you guys it's a great experience. But this applicant has put it together in a way that, again, sort of has established their brand as somebody who is actually dedicated to international work, right? Is actually sitting there and thinking about this and may become a leader in this field. It's not just a quick 2-week trip, to go abroad. So I think that this is part of what we're trying to emphasize here, is that as you go through the process, really think about how is this particular activity potentially going to work with the rest of my application.
Yeah, and I also want to add, these opportunities, you guys may be thinking, like, how do I find this stuff? And what I would say is just get creative, look around, talk to people, talk to physicians that you're working with, if they know any particular aid, excuse me, aid organizations that they work with, or if they have anything that a lot of physicians go yearly to a different country and provide some free clinical work. Look in your college. There's a lot of opportunities out there. You just have to be a little bit creative in locating them and then really subscribing to them.
And if I could just add for a moment, I think part of part of what you need to do is think of the strategy of the application itself, in that you have a couple of opportunities. One is the personal statement, and the other is the activities section, where you can present different aspects of yourself. As was mentioned earlier, clearly in the personal statement, you want to tell a story, you want to make it interesting, and you may or may not be able in the personal statement to demonstrate a lot of the things that you've done or the attributes, but if you haven't been able to do that in the personal statement, then you should be very strategic in what you're putting into your activities, because you can do anything from the volunteer or creative activities such as Drs. Mehta and Marinelli were just mentioning, to even some interesting hobbies, or how you've tutored or mentored elementary school children. So I think it's very important to think of, once you get to the point of actually working on the application, you need to understand that the application itself, the entire endeavor, is more than just filling in blanks. It's really a strategic endeavor that needs, in my opinion, a lot of thought as you're beginning to put it together.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And so moving on, the personal statement is just another really your opportunity to tell your unique story and to really highlight those characteristics and qualities and experiences that you've had in your extracurricular activity and throughout your life. Um, we won't spend too much time on the personal statement itself because that's a whole nother webinar. But really, the things you want to keep in mind to really establish your brand and to show that off in your personal statement is have an interesting introduction that's going to catch the reader's eye and make sure that they want to continue reading about it. And then talk about yourself and all of those qualities that you have through your experiences. So really use those experiences of your international work, your clinical volunteer work, or any kind of service-related work that really show who you are and your dedication to medicine, and use those experiences to stand out from the crowd, excuse me, and again, establish your brand and make yourself unique. And we've got a couple examples here. I won't read them all to you, but you can read as I'm talking about it. The first one was a physician who's practicing now, and obviously this person was pretty heavy into their international work, and they started their introduction just so interesting. I mean, you can sit there and pretty much get a picture in your head of what this applicant was experiencing, and then they end the introduction about how this connects to their goals and their endeavors, like Dr. Katzen was saying, and then also, you know, what their final goal is and how that's going to make them a better physician. The rest of the personal statement really talks about the development of his character and his qualities through his international work, and that all translated into how much he's going to make a good physician. Excuse me. The other one is, again, somebody is painting a picture about them racing, doing a marathon or a half marathon or whatever, and they're really showing you this is something that they put a lot of time and effort into it. And then again, they relate it back to being a physician, and I really like this one as well because think about all of the qualities that they're demonstrating here. They're demonstrating that they have determination, strength, perseverance, all of these great qualities that physicians should have. And so here they kind of set the stage and set this up, and that they're already setting the brand or the theme of their life and their application to medical school, that despite obstacles and things being very tough, they're strong, and that they're going to use those same qualities that they've developed throughout their life as a physician. This one really just sets up who they are and what they're going to be talking about for the remainder of the personal statement. And finally, this one was a personal statement I worked a lot with one of our applicants, and I just thought this was so great. This wasn't the introduction, but this was an excerpt from the middle of it, and he talked about throughout his whole personal statement his involvement in the organization GlobeMed. And again, this was an organization that he was very involved with, very committed to, and he really let his activities and his involvement with GlobeMed define who he is and how he will make a great doctor. And pretty much every paragraph and every sentence was strong, just as these are here, because he just demonstrated so many great qualities about him. And again, he really set out this theme when in his writing, is that he's somebody he's somebody dedicated to helping others, and somebody that is willing to go above and beyond when it comes to service-related activities. Another part, and we mentioned this in the poll, another part where you can really sell yourself is the interview day. And so this is a great chance for you to demonstrate what you've put on paper and demonstrate it to them by talking to them and really exhibiting all those great qualities that you say you have on paper. Now you can actually talk to them about it and show them that this is the person that you are, and that you can be personal, you can be outgoing, and this is a chance for you to be so memorable to the admissions committees, because they will remember an application on paper that really is unique, but they will also remember a well-prepared applicant and somebody who stands out to them by being personable and being having a great conversation and enjoy talking to them. And I think next we have a video of, I thought was a great example of a personal or excuse me, an interview. So I can't hear it.
No audio.
No audio.
Okay. Yeah, there may be no audio on this.
It did work.
Well, it's funny because I can hear it on my end, but I don't know if everybody else can.
No, unfortunately.
Try one thing here.
And that kind of spoiled me.
There you go.
Sciences. So I like being around people. And then eventually I was like, well, I like Spanish languages, so I dedicated time to go abroad. And when I went abroad, I did nothing, no science, other than and just focused on language and culture. And that kind of spoiled me for the sciences, because I like being around people. I don't want to be in the lab all the time. So from there on, I started doing more volunteer work, and I volunteered at a local youth center. They needed some people to do HIV, STD test counseling, so I got trained to do that. And it slowly kind of got into my head that maybe I could do medicine, seeing what the doctors were doing at night, treating these kids, some of them who were homeless. And I would have to give good news and bad news, and again, you're just there listening to them, and at the same time you're able to provide them with answers. And that was a large part of what made me decide to go into medicine. Now at this point, it was my senior year in college, and we have a med school advisor, and I met with her, and she's like, why are we meeting now? Oh my God. And then she's like, oh, you're biochem, okay, at least we don't have to have you do a post-bac. Thank God. But yeah, it was a slow transition. And I saw medicine as a very good way to wed my love of the sciences, because there's no shortage of science in medicine. I know plenty of doctors who went back into bench research, so there's always that avenue. But then you get to wed it with the humanities. You actually get to study populations. You can study the culture, because culture affects outcomes so significantly. We're realizing that more and more now. So medicine was the perfect union of my interest.
I chose this example because obviously this interviewer, he's pretty relaxed. He's probably familiar with who he's talking to, because he's a little bit more relaxed than probably most of you will be on your actual interview day. But I really liked how personable he was, how much it was just like he was not rehearsed. He was just telling his story, and he really made his story clear and unique about his path to medicine. He really was able to demonstrate how he had certain loves and certain interests that he bridged together and decided to go on this path to medicine. So I just thought that this was such a great example, because he probably looked like an awesome applicant on paper, but really when he went to the interview, he was able to demonstrate how well he can communicate with others and how well he will probably get along with many people as a physician. Dr. Mehta and Dr. Katzen, do you have any comments on his interview style?
I certainly agree with you. I think that he's very relaxed. He's obviously not in the least bit anxious. And most importantly, as Dr. Marinelli pointed out, he doesn't have a rehearsed speech. And one of the tips that I like to give people who I'm helping prepare for interviews is not to memorize a speech or a paragraph, because if I get interested as the interviewer and interrupt you, I'll throw you off your rhythm, or if I question you. But really to memorize only to memorize a couple of key words about the points that you want to get out, whether it's about you're an artist or a musician, or it's about your research or your volunteering. But to you, if I say research, you don't need a speech, because you've done it and you know what you want to say. Or if I say to you, athletics, maybe you've been the captain of the football team or something of that nature. And this is an example to me of somebody who did not memorize a speech, and he was talking about something that he's done, and he was very comfortable just going on about it, because he didn't need a speech, because it's something he had lived and participated in. So he was very comfortable just speaking for an extended period of time about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we could speed along here. So really, how do you bring all of this together? And as I was kind of hinting to earlier, I think it's important to think of your own life theme. As Dr. Menta had mentioned, kind of look in the mirror and introspect and try to really think about what defines you, what has really led you down this path. They don't always have to be science things. You can definitely talk about, like Dr. Katzen just said, your time on the sports team or anything like that. And weave it all together throughout your application to really establish this kind of theme and this brand to your life. And on the next slide, we can give you a couple examples if you're still trying to figure out what exactly are we talking about. So a couple examples, and I did mention this a little bit earlier with those personal statement examples, but one applicant lived abroad for a very long time, did a lot of international work, and it actually wasn't related to medicine at all, but he really developed this theme of cultural appreciation and having all these diverse experiences throughout his life and emphasized that in his application. Another applicant was a ballerina, and she had done ballet her whole life and continued to do so, and I loved her personal statement in her application because, again, she used this theme of dedication, perseverance, and talked about her different activities throughout her life, like her research, her college work, her service activities, and applied these characteristics that she had developed in ballet to all these other aspects of her life. Another applicant, and I've seen this quite a few times, some people, have to work to put themselves through college or pay the bills, and use those experiences to demonstrate that you've learned so much work ethic, responsibility, maturity, and use this theme to really show admissions committees that your experiences have made you unique in your own right and that you are different from the average applicant.
Dr. Marinelli, if I could just interject for a second.
Sure.
One point about the interview is, I always say if they spend 10 or 12 out of 15 or 20 minutes listening to you or talking with you or interacting with you about ballet or art or football or basketball or anything that you brought up, a lot of applicants feel that I didn't have a good interview, but I feel you had a great interview.
Yeah.
Because it shows that you were able to talk, and you've earned the right to have the interview, and now they just want to see, can you talk maybe with people that aren't quite as smart as you, or people from different cultures or socioeconomic statuses. And if you're able to talk about something that you think isn't important, whether it be art or even basketball or football or hiking or scuba, and you just have a conversation for 10 or 15 minutes, the interviewer will remember who you are. And I think that's the goal of what the applicant wants to achieve during an interview, to be remembered in a positive fashion.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Go ahead, Dr. Menta.
Yeah, so Dr. Marinelli just gave some great examples. Dr. Katzen just talked a little bit about what it is going to take on your interview, or sort of how an applicant can talk about interesting things on their interview that are outside of medicine, and that all again goes towards, I think, establishing your brand as a pre-med to be somebody who's different, right? So going around and just talking about your hospital volunteer experience can certainly make an impact and can certainly be something that's exciting and unique. However, if you haven't really gained a lot out of it, or you're just talking about the fact that you wheeled a patient from one room to another, how does that really separate you from the other applicant, and how does that really make you somebody who's special? So I think you need a lot of sort of the baseline of volunteering, research, clinical work, but what we're trying to get at is, how do you get to that next level? How do you put it all together to be something more unique, to be something that, as Dr. Katzen mentioned, on an interview, people want to talk to you about, right? They want to, they're excited to talk to you about, and you're excited to talk to them about. So, hopefully that's giving you a little bit of an overview of what we're going for. And now I know a lot of you out there are probably saying, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but I am not unique. You know, I'm just a regular old pre-med. I went and you know, I studied today. It's Thanksgiving break. I'm gonna take a couple of days to break, then I'm gonna get back to studying. I'm doing my volunteer work. I'm doing my research work, but I just don't get it. I don't know what you guys are talking about in terms of establishing a brand. How do I separate myself? How do I make myself unique? I have no idea. And a lot of applicants come to me and tell me, you know, I'm not unique. I'm just you know, like everybody else. And what I'll tell you is that, especially early on, you know what, you're wrong in the sense that you are unique. You just don't know it yet, maybe. You don't know what it is that you're going to be able to put forth on an application or put forth in your life eventually that makes you a little bit different. And keep in mind that not everybody has to go live abroad for 3 years. Not everybody has to be a ballerina, right? That's not what we're saying. What we are trying to get at is you must make yourself a complete package somehow, right? You must make yourself an individual who somebody looks at and says, yeah, you know what, this guy's got it all and really is looking towards being somebody who goes into medicine but also does public health on the side, or this person really has an awesome research bend and has 3 publications, right? So keep that in mind, that, you know, even though you may not think you're unique or may not have the most extravagant ideas of, you know, what is, you know, who you are or what you're going to bring to the application table, there is plenty out there for every single person who gets into medical school to be something a little bit different, right? You have the ability to be different, to be unique, whether you know it or not, honestly. And part of what we do at MedSchoolCoach is kind of help you figure that out, right? So we actually help you figure out when it comes time for the application, and even before, who you are and what is your brand, and, you know, how is it that you're going to portray yourself on an application? How is it that you're going to make yourself unique? And that's exactly what we do, and we help thousands of applicants a year kind of do this and successfully get into medical school. And that's why we're here. We have about 50 physician advisors at this point, Dr. Marinelli and Dr. Katzen being 2 of them, myself as well, and sort of we sit down and work with applicants and kind of think about, okay, you know, what is it that you've done? What is it that you can do from here on out to make yourself a better candidate? What is it that you can write about on the personal statement and then eventually talk about on interviews to put it all together to be that unique applicant to hopefully, you know, get into medical school? So for those of you who are early or applying next year, take a look at our website, take a look at some of the things that we can hopefully offer you and try to make you the best applicant that we can so that you can eventually get into med school. So I wanted to, again, you know, encourage you guys to use the question and answer box, because we're going to get into a Q&A with Dr. Marinelli and Dr. Katzen in a couple of seconds here. I also wanted to just note that I know a lot of you guys probably are asking, hey, I want a recording of this webinar. So that's easy. Just follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and we'll be posting the recording of the webinar in a couple of days as soon as we get it edited. So just follow us there, and you'll be able to get on the webinar. So get a recording of the webinar, as well as get on our list for all the, you know, future webinars that we hold. We do this every couple of weeks to really give you guys a great foundation of what it's going to take to apply to get into medical school. So with all that, what I wanted to do now was actually shift gears a little bit towards our question and answer session. And this is oftentimes the best part of the, webinars, because it really gives you guys out there a chance to actually pick the brains of a couple of people who've been on admissions committees and really understand what it takes to get into medical school. So again, you know, feel free to ask questions, and what I'm going to do is sort of go through them and get through as many as we can. Obviously, we're not going to have time, unfortunately, to get through all of them. So ask your questions. We'll try to get through as many as we can as we go forward here. So we got a couple of questions already that I think everybody can benefit from. So Dr. Katzen, why don't I start this question for you? And this is a specific question on the interview day from VJ, who says, are there any do's or don'ts for the interview day that you think are absolutely necessary for an applicant to know?
Sure. Let me go through a couple of basics. I always say that first of all, you've been given the opportunity to interview, and you need to look at the interview as a formal opportunity. I think it's important to realize that everybody who conducts an interview, whether they be a staff or private physician, resident intern, or medical student, is doing it voluntarily. And I emphasize that because I think at the beginning and the end of the interview, you should thank whoever it is for taking the time to interview you. The other thing that I'd like to point out is I think that at the end of the interview, as the interviewer, I should not remember what you wore. In other words, I think you should dress professionally and appropriately. Couple of other points. When you introduce yourself and come into the interview, I think you should introduce yourself with your first and last name. If you introduce yourself and say, "Hi, I'm Robbie," you're already demonizing yourself a little bit and putting yourself in an unnecessary inferior position. Throughout the interview, you want to not brag, but you want to put, if you will, your best foot forward. This is your day to shine. And when you get questions such as, "Tell me about your biggest fault," I think you should think about that really in advance, and that whatever fault you might want to bring up, because we all have faults, at the end of that, we should almost audibly hear a comma in the sentence where you tell me how you've grown or how you've changed. And that is no longer a fault. And most importantly, I think it's, as Dr. Marinelli had pointed out with the video that she played, it's very important not to sound rehearsed. It's more important that you be relaxed, and I think you can be most relaxed if we anticipate or help you anticipate some of the questions, and you just think more in terms of themes of what you're going to talk about, rather than the specific words or specific sentences. Because if you're talking about yourself or your own accomplishments or places you've been or things you've done, I think just remembering a couple of key words is much more efficient and safer, as opposed to trying to actually memorize a one-page or more speech.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Here's a question, Dr. Marinelli, I'll throw at you. Are there any cliches to avoid in the personal statement?
I think there are. And I think a few of them are going to be maybe extrinsic experiences that you've thought about now when you're applying to medical school that you think would convince an admissions committee that you want to go into medicine, but really at the time didn't have as big of an impact on you than you may have thought. So the best example I can think of is like somebody saying, "I wanted to be a doctor since I was 5. When I was 5, you know, I broke my ankle and I went to the doctor and he treated me so nice. And ever since then, I thought that, you know, I want to go into medicine." And maybe that is your real reason, but we do see that quite often as a cliche in personal statements. And you don't need to find this reason or this epiphany in your life that really transformed you into going into medicine. You can tell your own story. Even if it's, you know, I went to college, I explored several options, and then I decided science was great, and I started volunteering and getting into community service, and then ultimately clinical service, and I found I really liked it, and that's how my path is. Just be honest. You don't have to have some again, defining moment in your life where you decided to be a doctor. Not everybody is going to have that. And I think that's probably the most common cliche that I see. Great.
Thank you. Here's another question out there, and I can answer this one. I could try to answer this one. Do you have any advice on establishing a unique brand to present yourself to a very competitive med school, i.e. the, you know, sort of the top 10, top 20 medical schools? You know, there's obviously getting into medical school anywhere is a ginormous accomplishment, is something that anybody should be proud of, no matter what medical school you get into. As we already went over a lot of the numbers, only 40% of people who apply get in. And so getting in anywhere is huge, and again, something to be very proud of. But obviously getting into sort of a top 10, top 20 school is even harder, exponentially harder at the end of the day. And I can tell you sort of at Harvard, what the admissions committee here does is we basically, they'll sit down and they'll say, well, this applicant's great, right? They have a great GPA and MCAT. Obviously, that's a prerequisite for a place like Harvard. But the next question is, what's their it factor? And they say that at the table, and they say, what's this person's it factor? What do they bring? And that's again sort of the brand, right? That's what is it that you are actually bringing as an applicant to the table that's different than everybody else, and that's what we want to know. So how do you do that, or how do you make yourself even more competitive or a better applicant for these top tier schools? Well, I think a lot of it is going to go towards, making sure that everything you've done, or a lot of the things you've done as an undergrad, position yourself as somebody who's going to be a leader in the field, whatever field that may be. That may be public health, that may be just as a leader and a researcher, that may be as just a leading clinician, somebody who's really going to be able to, at the end of the day, say that, hey, I'm a physician, and I take care of patients, and that's my main priority. But at the same time, I have this unique interest in X or Y that hopefully will allow me to, bring something else to the table, to really make an impact within medicine that maybe others cannot. And I think that's part of what schools are looking for. So how do you do that? Well, I think you take everything that Dr. Marinelli and Dr. Katz and myself have been saying and actually take it to the extreme, and really make sure that as you go through and make yourself make yourself a competitive applicant, you're really establishing yourself as somebody who is unique and somebody who's going to add something to the table. Here's a simple question that I can give to Dr. Katzen. How early should I get started on my personal statement? We've got a lot of people out there who are applying next year. How early do you usually recommend your applicants get started on the personal statement, Dr. Katzen?
Each individual writes differently. Some can write fairly spontaneously, and some need to think about it for a while. Since, as we've implied, the AMCAS, the Common Application, is quite an endeavor to undertake, and I certainly think that the personal statement is one of the more challenging parts. I like to see people who know they're going to apply begin to work on it in really December, and by the end of January, beginning of February, think that they have a completed essay, and at that point probably get several people to read it, to give their opinions on it, so that they can begin to think about and prepare other parts of the application before it becomes live in the beginning of May. I think some people do have the ability to sit down and write, but I think most people need to think about it, maybe need to create an outline, start with bullet points, and just consider the points that I think Dr. Marinelli made a little while ago, what it is you want to get across about yourself in the application. You have to realize it has to have a flow, and there has to be a connection from the beginning to the end of it. So it's probably one of the more difficult essays that you will encounter. So I'm one that likes to do things in advance. So I like people to have started on it by December, January, if they know they're going to be applying in May, June.
Great, thank you. Dr. Marinelli, we have a question, probably not related necessarily specifically to branding, more sort of the entire application and the process. And it just simply asks, do you think research is necessary to get into medical school?
Great question. I think research is something you really, really want to have. I have seen people get into medical school without research, and I've seen people not get into medical school because they were lacking research, or at least that was a big gap in their application. So having research is definitely going to help your chances to get in. But if you absolutely cannot get research, I would still suggest applying and trying, but you should really prepare your application as thoroughly as possible the first time before you do apply. And that should be exhausting every avenue you can possibly think of to try to get a research experience. I get this question quite often for people that are out of undergrad, because obviously if you're not in college anymore, your research opportunities for bench research is pretty limited. So usually what I suggest to those people is, again, try to get that experience, because it's going to hopefully really help your application. And start looking into clinical research. You can look online in your area, ask around at the local hospitals or local physician offices, especially if you have a teaching hospital. Excuse me. Nearby. Definitely talk to the teaching hospital to see if there's any clinical research opportunities. And it may not be science research, but having some research activity where you're actually working through a hypothesis and using a thesis and using the scientific method, I think that's going to really help your application.
Great. Thank you so much. Dr. Katzen, here's a quick question for you. Sorry, I just had it for a second. I don't really, so this person is asking, I don't really have any awards or recognitions on my application. Do medical schools look down upon this?
Again, I think that this gets to how do you look at the application as a total entity. You know, as we mentioned before, there are a couple of components that I think are very key that go beyond, as Dr. Mehta mentioned, the GPA and the MCAT. What is it that you put forth about yourself in the personal statement, and how creative, or I'll use the word strategically again, do you utilize the AMCAS activities? Are there other things that you have done, other awards that you have done, that you have had, that you can bring to show different aspects of what you have done that don't necessarily have to be scientific or academic? Can you show that you were a leader? Can you show that you're artistic? Can you know, are you a scuba diving master? Those types of things, and that's where I think you know, you put together as strong an application as you can. And you know, we interview. You know, when I work with the applicants, I like to take a while to interview them, because sometimes we find things that we think may be of value just by talking to you that you may not have thought of yourself, as a method of strengthening another part of the total application, even if there is not a specific academic or other honor.
Great, thank you. Here's a question that I can take from Michael out there. He says, what is the best way for a middle-class white male to show diversity when applying to medical school? And I think you can pretty much replace middle-class white male with middle-class Asian, middle-class Indian. You know, a lot of, unfortunately, or you know, a lot of overrepresented minorities, let's say, within the medical field, and people who don't necessarily think of themselves as diverse. And you're right, you know, racially and socioeconomically, you may not be very diverse comparatively to the entire pool of applicants. But that doesn't mean you're actually not diverse, right? This is, again, I think goes back to the establishing the brand. If you can bring something else to the table, if you can bring something unique to the table, your socioeconomic status, you know, is going to go out the window, right? So if you're a middle-class white male who is a ballerina, well, that would be great. If you're a middle-class white male who has, as Dr. Manny mentioned, some examples, gone abroad and started some programs and started a nonprofit and really focused on international work, awesome. I mean, that is diversity. You are bringing diversity to the class. Even if you're a middle-class white male or a middle-class Asian who, maybe didn't study biology and studied something different in college and can show medical schools that, hey, I'm bringing something different to the table. That is enough diversity, to basically help a admissions committee say, okay, you know what, this person is bringing something a little bit different to the table. So keep in mind, diversity does not always come by the color of your skin. Let's see, Dr. Katzen, I'll go back to you to give Dr. Marinelli's voice a break here.
I'm going to actually step in and echo something real quick, Dr. Mehta.
Yeah, please.
Even though my voice is cracking all over the place. My first day of medical school, the dean of admissions stood up and talked to the entire class, and she was so proud about the class that she admitted, and she said, we have so many unique and diverse people here, and we have a professional volleyball player, we have a ballerina that did ballet on Broadway, and everyone was like, oh wow. For a while, people thought I was the ballerina, but it actually turned out that the ballerina was a middle white class male. But so your example is completely true. That the dean of admissions, the person who ultimately makes the class list, was just so impressed by this person's unique story, even though, yeah, technically they were not underrepresented in terms of ethnicity, but they really distinguished themselves on their application and made themselves unique that way.
Wow, I didn't even, I had no idea that was actually something that somebody was in Dr. Marinelli's class. So I take back my snickering about the male ballerina. Obviously, you can certainly be a unique applicant in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
That's great. Dr. Katzen, I'll ask you one more question here, which comes from Teju. It says, to what extent should I understand the U.S. healthcare system prior to my interviews?
I think that as an interviewer, you want to know you're dealing with somebody that's a little bit worldly, a little bit that knows something about current events. I don't necessarily want to know your politics, whether you think Obamacare is good or bad, or we'll call it Trump care is good or bad. I just want to know that you have some thoughts. And, one of the questions that people sometimes ask is, what do you think a current problem is in healthcare, be it globally or nationally? And students may sort of parrot access to care or cost, and my feeling is, okay, that's a good start, but now I want to know, okay, what would you do about it? Not necessarily looking for you to have the correct answer, but just to see if you're thoughtful and you're well read and up to date. I want to know you have a thought, even if it's not the right answer, or because a lot of people, a lot of politicians or whatnot haven't solved a lot of these problems, but we just want to see, do you think, or are you just going to parrot something you heard without any depth of knowledge? So I do think that you should be somewhat up to date on at least what I'll say are the current events in healthcare of what's going on.
Yeah, and I'll echo what Dr. Katzen just said, in that you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to have all the answers, nor do you have to know everything about every policy or about our healthcare system, but you should have a basic understanding of our healthcare system. You should have a basic understanding of some of the other healthcare systems in the world, because it just makes you look good, period. And I think that simply understanding and even reading more in depth about maybe one small part of our healthcare system, whether it's the individual mandate, for example. If you can go to an interview and talk sort of intelligently about the pros and cons of an individual mandate, you don't have to know everything else about the Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare as it's called, but the interviewer will say, okay, yeah, you know what, this person gets it. They understand at least parts of it. So read up on that, or read up on some other part that interests you. So 100%, you need to have some understanding, especially in the climate we I think are in right now politically. You don't have to know everything, but you should have some basic understanding. All right, guys. So it's about 10 o'clock here, which is usually the time we try to wrap up. And I know there's a lot of great questions out there, and we are excited to actually ask them and answer them. But unfortunately, we don't have time to answer every single one of them. That said, what I would encourage you guys to do is, drop us questions online at any point. We are going to have a lot of great new resources coming out, including a podcast probably in a couple of weeks here, in which we're actually going to go through a lot of the questions that you guys are asking here individually and try to come up with some answers. So we'll shoot you an email when that comes out and hopefully be able to answer a lot more of your questions. In the meantime, I also would encourage you guys who are applying next year or in 2 years to check us out at MedSchoolCoach. Also check out Prospective Doctor, which is a site we run which has a lot of free articles, a lot of free resources on there for you guys to read up on. And then if you are somebody who is going to utilize or need a little bit extra help on the application process, please check us out at MedSchoolCoach.com. We work with about 1,000 applicants a year now and have had great success getting people in. So hopefully we can help each and every one of you guys as well. So I really want to thank everybody who is out there for spending time with us before the holiday. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I hope everybody gets to spend some time with their families in the coming days. Thank you so much to Dr. Marinelli and Dr. Katzen for taking their time tonight and being on this webinar. Good luck, everybody. Again, check us out at MedSchoolCoach. Shoot us an email. Go online. Give us a call if you have any questions about how we can help you, and hopefully we can help you. If you guys are looking to download a copy of the webinar, again, go on to our social media pages, shoot us a like, shoot us a review, and we'll be able to send you that copy of the webinar when it becomes available. So again, thank you, everybody. Again, especially Dr. Katz and Dr. Marinelli for joining us tonight. And we will see you guys and hopefully work with all of you guys in the coming months and years, and look forward to eventually welcoming all of you pre-meds into the colleagues section as we move on.
Thank you so much. Thanks for bearing with me and my cold. Happy holidays, everyone. Enjoy your Thanksgiving.
Holidays. Thank you.